CL Thomas. How you guys doing? We are at the start of the spooky season. It just seems like the weather's not cooperating though for most of the US. I just got back from the Rock Island Roadhouse Paracon. On Saturday, it was 91 degrees in Chicago. Can you believe it? Well, outside of Chicago, 91 degrees, hot and humid. Here in Vegas, it's still well over 100. Today it was about 130 where I'm at. With spooky season, I like to revisit some of my famous cases with the Hans Holzer files. And with Hans Holzer, one such place that he investigated is I'm so sorry, you guys. I got like these little fruit flies buzzing around, and I don't know where they're coming from. So they're like all over my head. So if you see me like doing this, that's what that is, and they just keep flying in front of my face. But what I was saying was, Hans Holzer is one of those paranormal investigators that really kind of influenced me over the years. I just really like his work. I feel like he was very authentic, unlike a lot of the investigators out there today. He's one of the few people that I feel like was really onto something very authentic. And all his cases were just so amazing. He went so deep into each one. Well, one such place that he investigated was called Mystery Hill. It's a strange archaeological site in Salem, New Hampshire that is believed to be over 4,000 years old. Sometime in the 80s, I think they renamed it to America's Stonehenge. I'm not sure how that happened. We'll find out in just a minute. America's Stonehenge site consists of several large rocks and stone structures that are scattered around about 30 acres. Joining me is special guest Dennis Stone, whose family owned this site for many years and grew up here. Today, he's the president of the site and the preservation efforts that are surrounding this. I'm very excited to have him on, and we're going to talk a little bit about Hans Holzer and some of the work that he did on this site. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thank you for having me on tonight.
To get us started, how did your family become to own this land?
Yeah, it goes back almost 70 years ago, back to 1955. My dad was listening to a radio show on a Friday night, and the name of the show is Yankee Yarns, and the talk show host was Alton Hall Blackington, a native of Maine, and the show was out of Boston, Massachusetts, one of the biggest AM stations, and it still is today, and it was syndicated on other stations all over New England. On that Friday night at 7:30, my dad tuned in, and the topic was these strange stone ruins that you just described on the introduction. And my dad lived only 7 miles from this site and never had heard of the site before, not even like, people whispering or talking about it. So the show totally fascinated him. A few days later at a barber shop in the town of Derry, New Hampshire, where we live, Alan Shepard, the first astronaut, was from there. Robert Frost lived there and taught at the high school where I went to too. So it's about 50 miles north of Boston. Derry is about 7 miles or 6 miles from where we are right now in Salem, New Hampshire. And at the barber shop, he's just waiting to have his haircut, picked up a magazine, thumbing through it, and we got to one article, and it was all about these stone ruins that he had just heard on that radio show just a few days later. So it's quite a coincidence. He asked the barber, his name is Warren Haywood, he goes, "Hey, can I borrow this magazine?" He goes, "Well, how old is it?" He goes, "1952. It's been sitting here for 3 years." So fortunately, nobody threw it away in that 3 years, or we may not be talking tonight, possibly, because that really kind of triggered it for my dad. He took the magazine home that Saturday at my aunt and uncle's in that same town, playing cards with about 10 people or so. And he passed the magazine around, and like himself, nobody, as they looked at it, knew about this site until they got to my aunt and uncle, my mom's sister. And they looked at it and they said, "Oh, wow, we went there in the 1930s on our bicycles when they were dating." So they would ride their bikes down and have a picnic on the top of these stone ruins back in the 1930s. So, of course, my dad's next question is, can we find the place? They said, it's been 20 years. We haven't been there since. We can go try to look for the place, but it was not open to the public. There were no road signs. It wasn't a place that people went to unless they knew it was there, kind of, just local people. Like my aunt and uncle found out about it somehow from somebody. So that Sunday they drove around. I was 18 months old, so I'm kind of dating myself. And I probably stayed with my grandparents. So they went down and they rode around North Salem, New Hampshire, and they finally found a road that looked somewhat familiar, parked the car, and they walked a half a mile up the hill. And when they got to the top, there was a site that, of course, he had seen in the magazine and heard about on that WBZ radio show, you know. And he climbed under the chain link fence. It had barbed wire on top. It was locked up. It's about a 1 acre area. The main site is where the highest density of structures are. But it is about a 110-acre site with features all over the hilltop. The 30 acres, I'm not sure. That might be something, I keep seeing that on radio shows come up quite a bit, 30 acres, and I'm not sure. And even our local TV station the other day did a whole week on us, and they mentioned 30 acres again. It must be in some of our literature, because it's really almost a 110-acre site with walls and all sorts of features all over the entire property. But he spent quite a bit of time inside the site, wandering around, looking at it. At that time, the site had been under archaeological work since the late 1930s, but there was still a lot of, bushes and debris, and they lost sight of him in there. And he finally crawled out underneath the fence after about an hour and was kind of blown away by the place. And mentioned to my aunt and uncle, my mom, that the place is fascinating. He'd like to get involved with research. Maybe open it to the public at some point. And at that time, my mom and dad had just built a house. They actually built it themselves with the help of relatives. My sister was on her way, and my dad had a new job as an engineer at AT&T Bell Laboratories. He had just got out of the Coast Guard. He had served the Coast Guard for several years up in Canada, actually, for the U.S. Coast Guard, up near where the Vikings landed, right across from Lonzo Meadow in Newfoundland. He was actually in Labrador. And we just visited that site last year. It's really a beautiful area, but he was there in the early 50s before they found the Viking evidence. So my mom said something about, you got rocks in your head, and I guess he did. He took it, very, very passionately, this whole thing, and he started doing some research, met the owner of the property, and then 3 years later, after working with the owner, he worked out a lease agreement to open it to the public. It was actually the summer solstice was a soft opening in 1958. And July 12th, they had an opening with the governor, the actual official opening. So we've been open for about over 66 years now. But it was almost 70 years ago that we first went to the site. And I went there as a baby, too, to see these ruins, So that's my family. I'm the second generation. My son, he's an engineer at Raytheon, but he is involved with the site. His wife, he met in college, actually has been with us since they graduated from college. She's one of our staff people in administration there. I have a granddaughter now. She's 4 years old, and she's there, except for preschool. She's usually there during the day, helping us out, doing her thing there. So 4 generations. So that's how I got involved.
Just wrapped up into this place.
Yeah. Well, we all had careers. My wife had a career with Chrysler Financial, and she had her MBA. So she was with a couple companies, and I met her in '84. And then 9 years later, she decided to leave the corporate world and just run the place. And then I worked for the airlines for my whole career. I went into flying, but on my days off, I was working at the museum. And so it's my passion, too.
No, there's been a lot of research done to this place. What have you found out through the LIDAR and carbon dating?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of different new type of technologies, and LIDAR is fairly new. We started using that in 2020. We did 16 of the 110 acres, and a gentleman had the handheld LIDAR. He contacted me 4.5 years ago. He's from Connecticut, and he said, I'm a landscape architect, but I just got into LIDAR a year ago, I guess in 2019, and he said, I'd like to come up and do take some images of your site. And I thought, well, that's a great opportunity. So he started in the spring of 2020, and he did about 16 acres. His unit's $50,000. It shoots out 80 meters, 16 lasers, a high definition camera, pretty sophisticated unit. And that's made in Florida. And he bought the software up in Montreal, and then he bought a brand new supercomputer. And just on that 16 acres, it spent 600 hours processing the data. We have 1 terabyte, I guess, hard drive of that data, and it can see down to a centimeter, approximately a centimeter. And you can actually go out like you're in space looking back down at the place. You can go all around it. The light has been amazing. And one thing we found, we didn't realize, is that some of the floor plans of these structures, there's a chamber in ruins, which looks rectangular. There's a patty chamber that looks rectangular. There's a courtyard area that settlers actually built a wooden house over back in the probably the late 1700s, the Patty family. And we thought it was rectangular too. And the big table, I think you have a photograph of the table, it looks like a rectangular groove on it. And there's actually a niche next to the table. We used to call it the animal pen. It's an open, stone-made kind of, looks rectangular with two little niches, like they could put food in there, next to the table. But what we found out is they're all trapezoid in shape. The floor plans are all trapezoid. That LiDAR helped discover that, if you will, for us. But carbon dating started in 1967, and we've done 16 of them on the site. The oldest on the main site now is 4,000 years old. That was 1971, an excavation with a charcoal. Just prior to that, in 1970, we got 3,000-year-old charcoal on a different part of the site. And in 1969, back to where the 4,000-year-old charcoal was, we found charcoal that dated to about 3,000 years old. And in that mix, they found hammer stones, rubbing stones, stone scrapers, stone picks, and stone spallings, little plates of stone. When they were making the site, they used big slabs of stone that they actually detached from the bedrock. So they'd work a fissure or crack, they would raise the stones up, and then they would dress or shape the stones using a technique called percussion flaking. With hammer stone, striking the edge of the stone, knocking off little chips to get the shape of the stone they wanted. Even the table, the astronomical alignments, the roof slabs, all of that. Within that 16 acres, by 1988, one of our researchers had counted 300 slabs of stone that were once part of the bedrock that these people actually quarried, shaped, and then used for construction. And that Stone Age technology, it doesn't really date it precisely, but it's not something a farmer would have done or a shoemaker back in the 1800s. They would have used metal tools to do the same thing, You see all the little drill marks starting in the 1780s. They started using that technique and plug and feather. So we have also used DNA recently on some bones, and we also carbon dated those bones, and they were found on the site almost 90 years ago by the first researcher, basically on bedrock with a little bit of dirt. There were 3 bones, and they
were these human?
I'm sorry?
Were these human bones?
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, they turned out they were, and they were found in the middle of the site of that 1 acre area. And we have photographs going back to 1900. We have 4 from 1920, and before the first archaeologist came along in 1937. You can see the bedrock and a very, very thin layer of soil and debris. And those bones were found there in 1937 by Mr. Goodwin. And he kept the bones. There were 3 of them. Thank God he kept them. And in 1968, 30 years later, a woman actually took the bones to the Smithsonian in Washington. She was a school teacher. She worked for the Timberland school system in New Hampshire, and she drove them down there. And a doctor, I always mess up her first name. I think it's Lucine St. Hoyan. She's a physical anthropologist at the Smithsonian. She looked at them, and they did not have DNA back then. She goes, I think he's a human. And then she went on to describe the density, the color of the bones, and so forth. And then she goes, they look like they're from 3 different parts of the body. But she said, and the final part of her report was, I feel these are human. They came back to us in 1968. And last year, we sent them up to Thunder Bay, Canada, to I think it's called Lake Point University, and husband and wife team do DNA up there. 2 months later, what we did is we kept one in safekeeping in our museum. We sent the other 2 in 2 different boxes in case the mail, they got lost in the mail, or customs. They had to go through customs. And we got the results back that they matched 39,500 samples, and they appear to be Greek ancestry. We're like, oh, that's interesting, because we know the Patty family that were up there, they're English, I mean, they could have had somebody in the family that was Greek, but they were Greek. And we don't have any Greek names, but again, somebody obviously was up there. And then the question came up, why were these bones left to, the body left to decompose there? It's, well, maybe a dog dragged the bones up from a local burial place. But they're from 3 different parts of the body, so that makes it more unlikely. And again, they were found right on the site, and the 2 bones were actually the same person or very close relatives. So then we had them carbon dated at the University of Arizona, Tucson. We had to send them to our laboratory in Massachusetts that we've been using since 1967. The son is now running the whole thing. Dr. Harold Kruger was the original gentleman my dad dealt with. He died back about 30 years ago. His son's running the whole laboratory now. He got them all prepared, sent them to Arizona, and then we got the results back 4 months later that they dated anywhere from 1690 AD up to about 1900 with an average date of 1850. It just added more mystery to who was this person? Why were they left on top of the site with there is no depth of soil there to bury a body, you know. It's
Right.
bedrock, and then there's a thin layer of soil on top, rubble and debris. So we haven't been using DNA and carbon dating recently. And actually, that was mass accelerated spectrometry. It's 1,000th the actual requirement of carbon dating. Carbon dating, you have to, the guy at the laboratory in Massachusetts would never, in 1968, been able to carbon dating. There's not enough carbon, there's not enough bone here. But with mass accelerated spectrometry, we can do this, you know. But we've been using ground penetration radar since the 90s, and we've used it more recently. And we want to map all the underground man-made drains. The whole site was laid out with underground storm system by the original builders, so they had some planning. And that's because the whole hilltop is bedrock. The whole hill is entirely rock. It's granite. There's an earthquake fault line that bisects not only the hilltop, but the entire site is cut in half by this fault that runs right across it. It's part of a Clinton-Newbury fault. Some people suggest that was intentional. Not only is it easy to extract stones when you have Mother Nature cracking the bedrock for you. I mean, this is a very deep, it goes down miles probably. But the Inca and Peru did the same thing. Machu Picchu was built on a fault, and they actually took advantage of the fault to extract stones. And in Wales and England, some of those ancient megalithic stone circles, my friend over there from Avebury, she's supposed to be doing Maria Wheatley, she's up in Vermont right now, but she lives right near Stonehenge and Avebury, one of the biggest megalithic sites in the world. And I've been there several times, but I didn't meet her when I went. She goes, all these stone circles are within a mile or sitting right on top of fault lines over in Wales. And they kind of go into England too. So that's just one of those interesting things too. So we are using, all sorts of modern technology. And we have plans in the future of using more of this. I think science might help settle some of the questions we have of who built the site, what was it used for, when was it used. I don't know if we'll ever know what happened to the people, though, because one thing we found over the last 40 years, and the first one was found in 1982, is one of these big slabs. It was about 400 feet from the main site. It was raised, propped. The edge of it was all serrated where they were smashing it. 1983, they excavated, found all the flakes of stone. And our state archaeologist, Dr. Gary Hume, a lithic specialist, he's the one that really helps to, he knows how stone tools are made by ancient man. He's a specialist in that, and he's still living today. He did 3 projects in 1980 through 83. And he said it's unmistakable that these ancient people were actually raising these big stones, propping them up, and then, like I mentioned earlier, shaping them. But since then, we found 34 all over the hilltop, and these stones never made it to the site. So it came as a big, kind of a surprise, I think, that these people, whoever they were still building this place and had grand plans and moving these multi-ton stones up the hill, maybe to the main site for further construction, and then something happened. It's like, where did they go? Why did they stop? Was it warfare? Was it disease? Was it environmental? Was it something else that drove them away from this site? Because it looked like they were building it over a long time and they just abandoned everything. And that does happen at other sites too in the world,
Is there any similarities between this site and the actual Stonehenge over in England?
It's not, yeah, we get that quite a bit. It's actually, the name was changed in 82 to better reflect the astronomical alignments. And our alignments are similar with the solar and lunar alignments. However, the form of our structures are much closer to some of the other 50,000 megalithic sites in Western Europe. We were looking at a couple before the show, and I've seen the same kind of structures over in Ireland. We've been all over Europe, actually. And Stonehenge is so unique with all the large, monoliths stood up. And it has small monoliths and very large ones, and also it has the trilithons in the center. And so Stonehenge is quite unique, but functionally ours is very similar. But we also have 24-star alignments that Stonehenge does not have. And we have what we call the cross-quarter days. And recently, we had a lady visit us about 10 days ago, and I didn't wait on her when she came into the museum. She went up and did a tour for an hour and a half. She came back down, and she bought my book. She was about ready to leave, and I said, "Oh, where are you from?" I could tell she had an English accent. She goes, "Oh, from England." And I said, "Oh, that's really nice. Thank you so much for visiting." She goes, "Well, actually, I'm one of the administrators at Stonehenge." So I was like, "Wow, this is pretty cool." I said, "Well, I've been there. I've been there a number of times in the 80s and 90s, but I haven't been recently." So I just got another letter back just a couple of days ago from her saying how much she enjoyed the site and, what and time I took to talk to her. and she's been showing it to both visitors and to some of her staff over there. The book on our place. But again,
Have there been reported any paranormal experiences or sightings at the site since you've been there?
Yeah, at our site, I mean, there's been different types of things. Hans, of course, we mentioned Hans Holzer, and he started coming in 1970 to our site. And in 1974 was kind of a big year with Hans, and he brought in 3 different psychics. And one came on like July 12th, one on November 12th, and the other one might have been in the spring. I forget if it was May or April. So it seemed like be on the 12th. And they would fly out of New York City. My mom would pick him up at the Manchester, New Hampshire airport. And we have all the reports of that. And one of them was Ethel Myers. She came on November 12th. She was an elderly lady at the time, and she was very, very famous. Ingrid Beckman was another one he brought up in the summer, and she was kind of new to the paranormal, or getting her feet wet, I guess, And Hans thought she had a lot of potential. And then Nancy Abel was another one he brought up. And there were others too in other years, and I don't recall the names. But the results of that particular year, Hans wrote a book in 1992, almost 20 years later. It was called Long Before Columbus. And Hans, the foreword was written by Barbara Hand Cloud. And Hans, throughout the entire book, not only gets into the archaeology, but then he gets into the paranormal. And he gives you the readings by the 3 different people.
Mm-hmm.
And on November,
he had 3 psychics come up and do impressions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and because he recorded them both with a recorder, and also he took video. I mean, he had it like 8mm super 8 or whatever it was back then. Hans was good with that. He would record everything. And I guess he has, I don't know how many tapes he has recording of different people he did during his lifetime. His daughter said his files are very, very extensive. But when Ethel Myers came on November 12th, Betty Hill and Bonnie Hill, the New Hampshire couple that were abducted in 1961. Betty must have heard about this in the newspaper. She lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, about 30 miles away, and she made her way over to meet Hans and also to meet Ethel Myers. And she wanted a reading by Ethel. And I asked Alexander Holzer, Hans' daughter, in 2020 when they were doing the Holzer files for Discovery Network, the Travel Channel, with David Schrader.
That's a good show. Yeah.
Yeah, and as it turns out, I asked her, "Do you know if the recordings or even maybe 8mm film of her giving this reading to Betty Hill?" And Alexandra thought it was interesting. She goes, "I will check my dad's file." So I'm going to have to get back to her and see if she ever found it, because a lot of people in that paranormal, the UFO, would be very, very interested to see what Ethel Myers had to say about that. So if anybody's interested, I bet you can find the book. It's 1992. It's called Long Before Columbus, and it goes into all of what these psychics, I can't remember all the details, but all 3 psychics and what they experienced there, during that year. And then in 76, he was there to do Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of. He produced that whole episode. And he was part of that on the Holzer files. And I'm in the background. I think I was walking Ethel Myers up with my Uncle Oz. So I'm like, because I used that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I hadn't seen that for 50-something, 50-something years. It's pretty wild. We do have paranormal teams that have been up. I don't know if you're familiar with Jeff Belanger. He's one of the writers for Ghost Hunters. Ghost Adventures on Travel Channel. And he lives in Massachusetts. He has his own podcast. And he's been to our site a number of times. In fact, he brought up one of the hosts from that show. I got to meet him. He's one of the local guys, because I think there's 3, the other 2 live across the country. And so Jeff's been up there. He's done his own work on our site. And I think you could look up Jeff Belanger and see what he has to say about our site. He made a beautiful calendar 10 years ago, and it shows the sacrificial table area. And then he has, that's 1 month, and then the other month are different houses that are haunted all over New England. It's pretty cool, That was a 2014. I kept that calendar, by the way. I still have it in my war room upstairs at the museum. Kind of stuck in time. But every fall we have different psychics. We just had 2 paranormal experiences. Last Friday night we had about 49 people come up, and it was kind of a sky watch. And it was 2 hosts, and they're involved with UFO, the UFO and the paranormal, And that was a lot of fun. And they told stories about Bonnie and Betty Hill, the incident at Exeter, and different other ones that took place in New England. But over our site, I mentioned they asked me to give a little talk. And over our site a couple of years ago, a mom and a daughter were driving up to visit us, and they were going around our hill on the road, and they looked up and they saw something unusual. They took the camera out and they took video of it, I think about 3 minutes. And what it looks like is a cube-shaped object flying on top of the hill. Unfortunately, that was about 3 years ago, and I tried to save that tape. It was on our email at our museum, and something happened, and it's gone. So I don't have it, but I wish you would come back and give us it again, so we can show it to people. I have my own experience. I saw a very bright light to the west of the property 3 years ago in February, and we live on property that abuts the museum. We bought the property back in the mid-'80s, built a house that's on the cul-de-sac, so we're lucky to get the land that abuts us. Yeah, I was just looking out our window. It was 9 o'clock February, nice night, and it's dark in our living room. We stay in what we call the sunroom. That's where my wife was watching TV. The light was on in there. And I saw this bright light, and it was extremely, extremely bright. I flew for 42 years. I flew about 30,000 hours. I even flew for UPS back in the 80s on the 727, mostly night flying. Anyway, I kind of know, what an airplane looks like and everything. And I'm looking at this light go off. That's a landing light. That's really a bright landing light. All of a sudden, about 3 seconds, the thing went straight to the ground. And I'm like, oh my God, what the heck, We don't have anything like that. And it went right to the ground, I contacted Betty Hill's niece, Kathleen Marden. Are you familiar with her?
No.
She wrote a book with Stanton Friedman. He's really big. He passed away. He's Canadian, I guess. And I contacted her, and she's big in MUFON too, and she's on a lot of TV shows. She's written several books, one of them with two with Stanton Friedman, as a matter of fact. I said, what type of object would go straight to the ground? There's no big body of water there. And she said, well, Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, which you might have heard of, that's really, yeah. And she said reptilians, that was her answer to me. She's been to our site too when Betty came back in the 70s. She's living in Florida now. So we've had other occurrences here too. So, with UFOs,
Was there any symbolism or alignments found at the site that would indicate ritualistic stuff happening there?
Well, we do have inscriptions that have been found, and they were found in the late 60s, and they were put on display as unknown markings. And these are stones that may be about 1 inch to 1.5 inches in depth, and maybe a couple feet across, kind of like tablets, if you will. And they're still on display in our museum today. It wasn't until Barry Fell came along in 1975. He was a Harvard University professor of invertebrate marine zoology, but he was also a epigrapher, one that studies ancient script, and he knew about 15. He could read about 15 ancient scripts like Libyan, Phoenician, Celtic. Let's see what else did he did. I think it was Minoan Linear A. One of them hasn't been translated yet, but he also spoke several modern languages. From New Zealand, went to school in Edinburgh, Scotland, and then he came to the States, worked at Harvard University, visited us in '75. And he took a couple of the tablets back to his home in Arlington, Massachusetts, near Boston. And the results were, he said, well, and this took a little while for him to do this, but he said, you have Phoenician writing here. And one of them said that chamber that this stone was found at was a temple dedicated to Baal on behalf of the Canaanites, who were actually the Phoenicians. Also, we found Celtic Ogum, or Ogham, as they pronounce it, and Libyan. And his thought was, after studying this for many years, and he wrote America BC in '76 on our bicentennial year, and then he wrote 2 more books, but he wrote many different publications called the Occasional Publications for the Epigraphic Society, which he founded that in 1974. They had like 1,200 members, and it's still going today. That group is still going. He died in '94. But he said that he felt that these people came out of Spain and Portugal. And so he felt that, like we do, is that the site's a ceremonial site. It's not a place where people live. We think it was probably where they celebrated solstices, equinoxes, the cross-quarter days. Probably priest or shaman could have stayed in the oracle chamber. There's like an 8-foot bed that you can climb into. It has a window. And that chamber has 5 closets. It has a deer carving. It has an arrow carving. It has a chimney flue with 2 stone louvers. Unfortunately, in 1958-59, I guess it was the first year we were open, somebody stole the 2 stone louvers. All we have is photographs. I don't know if it was one of our visitors or somebody came up after hours, but that's a shame when people steal things like that.
That's a shame.
It's really, it's really vandalism basically. It
Yeah.
has a bench seat in there, and this chamber is it's amazing. It looks kind of like the letter. I think it looks like the letter T if you took the roof off. But Mr. Goodwin back in the 30s named it the Y cabinet. He thought it looked like the letter Y, and it is right next to this sacrificial table, which is a stone that's about 9 feet by 6 feet, and it has that big trapezoidal groove on top of it with a speaking tube coming out underneath it. And the table sits on 4 legs.
A speaking
We
tube? Is that what you
Yeah,
said?
yeah, it's actually in one of the pictures I sent you. It's
Yep.
maybe 10 inches by 12 or whatever, and it goes 6 feet through the wall, and it comes out underneath the sacrificial table. We think somebody would stand inside the oracle chamber and speak through there, and the voice will come out. If you're standing above the table on a ramp, looking down at the table, and I think I have a couple of shots looking down at the table. That's where we think people would watch a ceremony if that's what it was used for. You'd hear the voice coming out, and it works good today. But back in the 30s, both ends of that tube were plugged. It had 2 stone plugs, like you concealed it. And one of the young men working for Mr. Goodwin, named Paul, actually wiggled a stone inside the chamber in 1937. He went back they had a wooden bunkhouse just outside what we call the back gate, so they could sleep overnight there. He came back with a kitchen knife, got it in there, wedged it in there, pulled the stone out, and he sees like a 6 foot, looked like a closet, but it's a really long, skinny 6 foot closet. The next year, they're cleaning around the table. They thought the table was sitting on dirt. As they dug down, they were kind of surprised. It sits on 4 legs. But as they got near where the speaking tube comes out, they saw a plug of stone. It didn't look like the rest of the rocks overlapping. They pulled the stone out. There it is right there. It's not actually, you can just barely see at the bottom a little bit of light, but that's part of the speaking tube. I should get a better picture sometime. I think that picture was kind of cropped. You can't see it too good in that.
Yeah.
But the other side of it, as they dug down, they found a plug and they pulled it out, and now we have this speaking tube. Where I'm looking right now, below your feet, the bedrock had been quarried to remove it, to use it for building material and to lower the floor, except under the speaking tube, they left a chunk of bedrock, there, so you could actually stand on it. So somebody around 5'5", 5'7", I'm around 5'7", could stand there very easily, and you're just perfect. You yell through that tube. Where it comes out is actually flared. We discovered that during a vandalism repair 5 years ago. We didn't realize that the end of that is flared like a trumpet or clarinet or some other woodwind instrument, that has that flare to it, maybe like a saxophone. And that might be to amplify the sound. When I was in Malta back in the 90s, we went to Malta below Sicily and below Italy. They have some of the older, at that time they said some of the oldest chambers in the world. Now we know Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is about twice as old, but amazing structures. And I talked to one of the guys, I said, what are those holes in the wall for? And these big slabs, huge slabs stood up. We call it orthostats. There's holes in the wall. I'm like, what are they used for? I let light in. He goes, no, I think these were oracle tubes or speaking tubes, and a priest or priestess, which, or shaman or whatever, would speak through here, and people would hear this, and they might get prophecy or instruction or something like that, from the priest. We've also been to Delphi in Greece too, and the oracle of Delphi with I think usually the women, and there was an earthquake fault line there too, and they said at that time that Delphi was occupied, there were gases coming out from the ground, and that might have influenced the priestess. Her mind might have been altered while she's giving out these different types of readings or instructions or something. So that's kind of interesting, but the oracle's not unusual. So that oracle tube, the chamber itself, might have been where somebody stayed during these special times of the year. Otherwise, you'd live in hide, wood, or bark homes somewhere in the area, because it's not very comfortable to live in.
So this place has astronomical events too, right? According to
Right.
ancient
Yeah.
practices?
Yeah, exactly. We do. We have ceremonies on the days, like the summer solstice. We just had this fall equinox. We had about a 3-hour ceremony, and the woman's been coming. She's from Holland, and she does kind of a Native American, kind of a New Age, part African, I guess, ritual. She's been doing since the early 90s at our site. And she does go back to Holland once in a while, where there are megalithic sites, as a matter of fact. But we open from sunrise to sunset. The summer solstice, which that picture is of the sunset, around 8:20 in the evening, and we're open in the morning, and we have to get up super early for the summer. We're up like about 4:30 to get there to open it up. People come up, and that's one of our bigger events if the weather's good. And then we have a drumming circle before the sun sets on these occasions too, and that's really popular. People bring their own drums. We sell them at our place too, but in our gift shop. but people bring the drums and they do a drumming circle for about an hour or so just before the sunset, and then kind of stops and you watch the sunset on the stones. Winter solstice, summer solstice, spring and fall equinox. Winter solstice will be the next one coming up just in a couple months. So hopefully we don't have a blizzard. With a blizzard, it's a little rough. We do snowshoeing up there, but we do open it up for a snowshoeing center, but it does get a little rough then.
Do you ever notice the differences in the energy around a place whenever these ceremonies take place?
Well, I've heard people say that are very sensitive to that, and they say that they feel a certain energy there during the solstices, equinox, cross quarter days, those events. Myself, I just feel a lot of peace and harmony. I've always have since I've been a kid. It's just very, very peaceful. I walk my dog up there after work because we live beyond that summer solstice. Our home is down there somewhere about 900 feet away on our own property. Like I say, that we bought in the 80s. We're so fortunate to find a cul-de-sac, that we could do that on, and have access to the property. So I go up there quite often to just sit up there in the evening when everybody's gone. It's very, very peaceful. But I have done a little bit of, I tried the dowsing rods, and I seem to do okay with it. My dad actually dowsed the first well at the museum using that. What we do have, and I think Maria's going to get into that, the one from England, she's big on dowsing. Her dad visited us 44 years ago. He wrote a couple books, and he was impressed by our site, I guess, back then. She's never been to our site, but she wants to do 2 workshops on the May Day, which is big, the ancient Celtic May Day of Beltane. But Native Americans also, when you go to Mesa Verde, they celebrated the cross-quarter days too. I was rather shocked when I got there in 1990, the first time. We were there more recently too at Mesa Verde. They do have the quarter days, spring, winter, summer, and fall. They have the days in between. And I'm like, wow, we got that too at our site. Stonehenge does not have the cross-quarter days. Although the lady that was there the other day from England, the staff says, I think if the archaeologists would open their mind up and look at some of the alignments, I think we would have the cross-quarter. So I don't know where that stands, but at this moment, they don't have the cross-quarter days. So we do have celebrations on those days. We open special in the morning and close in the evening. And the drumming circle is one thing. The other the spiritual ceremony goes on, I think, from 1 to about 4:30, on those days too. But she's going to do dowsing up there. And we have found about 30, actually found 2 more this week. And I think that is number 30 windows. These are windows in the stone walls that lie all over the hilltop. The first one was found in 2016. And today, just last week, I found 2 more. I was cleaning some firewood up there, and I'm like, I got 2 more here. I think I took photographs of them. And actually, it's part of a serpent wall, I believe, too, because we started finding serpent walls shaped like snakes here. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a spiritualism with the serpent, whether it's Adam and Eve with the Bible, or St. Patty driving out the serpent, or the Egyptians with the cobra. But the Native Americans, if you just look at the pottery and the artwork, the petroglyphs and the pictographs out west, the serpents everywhere. In New Mexico, we've been down there, and it's Cuculcan and Quetzalcoatl. South America has a serpent.
That's interesting, because the serpent has a lot of significance for the medical community as well, going way back to the Greek times, ancient Greeks.
Exactly right. In our medical staff, with the 1 or 2 snakes, the healing.
Yeah.
But what we did find, my first serpent was about 27 feet on a ridge. I've been by that place. It's a snowshoe trail. It's also used for ATV, picking up firewood, and going to my dad's house. My dad died in 2009. The same year Hans died, as a matter of fact. But my dad's home, and that was the way to my dad's house. He lived on 2 acres that abutted the property also on the north side. And I went by one day. I looked over about 65 feet. I'd seen the walls, I don't know, hundreds of times. He was in the woods. The light just went through the trees. I said, that looks so unusual. I don't know why. It just caught me. So I got off my ATV, walked about 65 feet, and I thought, oh my God, I think I got a wall shaped like a snake, It seemed to have a head, a rock head, a body that tapered down to about a 3-foot long stone, rectangular with rounded corners. I think that's the tail on a ridge of bedrock. And I was kind of surprised, and I was a little bit shocked because we've been by there so many times. My dad used to look at these walls all the time with other researchers and never noticed this feature, And we started seeing a few more. And that spring, Scott Walters was up. He's from the America on Earth series. He comes up quite a bit. He was up this year, as a matter of fact, to our place. And he's on Gaia TV now. But he was there with an entourage of people from England. And so I was showing him all this serpent, a couple of my serpents in the spring of 2016. And he had already seen one in Scotland, a stone wall that was shaped like a snake. That was on one of his episodes. The Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, which we were there last year, and one in Ontario, Canada. So yeah, the serpent's kind of big. We
What's
have them
interesting
that.
about that is that you found bones that had, from what I recall, what you said earlier, you found bones that the DNA indicated that they were Greek.
Right,
Is that right?
exactly.
And
That's
so the
correct. Yeah.
snake, Caduceus, is actually from Greek mythology.
It is, yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot of that mythology, and we're kind of into that. I will say one thing about those bones too that was reported back in 1968, is that the bones had markings on them. The bones had scratch marks or some sort of I forget what the word was, like incised or something like that, while the person was alive. So maybe this person was injured somehow, and might have lived a little while. So there were some markings on the bone that kind of, raised their eyebrows when they saw that at the Smithsonian. We still don't
Hmm.
know what the story of that is. Um, but today we have 30. So some of the serpents are straight, some have a 90-degree tail, some have a bent tail or a 90-degree head and tail. Some are S-shaped. A couple of them, I think we have 4 now that are actually, they bite their tails, the Ouroboros. And if you know, like ancient Egyptian, Greek, and others, that Ouroboros is like the circle of
Hmm.
life, infinity. It can be
Right.
wisdom, wholesomeness. But Native Americans, when you look at some of their pottery and stuff, or people on this side of the ocean, they seem to have artwork that shows serpents. And I even see pictures
Yes.
of snakes actually biting their tail.
Yeah.
So, so one
That's
of
the
ours is
circle of life.
the circle
That.
of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have that, but these serpents now, there are over 400 in Connecticut in the town of North Stonington. That town has over 8,000 different stone features, chambers, standing stone, cairns, everything we have at our site spread over 35,000 acres. That came to us in 2016 when a book was written by a guy named Mark Starr who lives there. He writes for Yankee Magazine. He writes about New England fishing villages. He's a photographer and a writer. And he wrote this book after living there 30 years by 2016 because these aren't built by farmers. The land here is hilly, swampy, treacherous. Because the soil is not arable for growing crops. You could put animals out here to graze. But because farmers wouldn't waste all this time building walls, some of them run 20 feet and they're beautifully built. They don't do anything. And then you get into the serpentine walls that undulate. Some of the walls actually at our site and down there too, they get fatter in the middle. They either have a big boulder or the wall, actually the small stones are actually built out. And we think that represents either pregnancy of the serpent or it ate its prey. And we have a couple of those. But since then, we found these serpent walls are all over the Northeast. They're in, Maria just found one in Vermont. They were in the
Hmm.
Hudson Valley, and they knew these sites in the Hudson Valley. Dutchess, Westchester, and Putnam County, just north of New York City, had about
Hmm.
500 sites similar to ours. The stone walls were kind of ignored. They thought, oh, farmers must have built these. Now they're looking at them going, no, they're not. They have undulations, they have heads, they have tails.
There's one in Tennessee as well. There's an archaeological site in eastern Tennessee.
Oh,
Maybe
there is.
that's
I'll have to
one.
check that. I
Mhm.
know of one in eastern Kentucky and it has a wide mouth. It's a stone wall serpent, and it looks like one of ours in Kentucky. So thank you for telling me. I'll have to
Yeah,
see if
I'll
we can dig
send you
into that.
it's a
Oh,
park. I'll send you the park name for
I
that
would
when we get
love to
off.
see.
I
Thank you
kind
for
of
that. Yeah.
I kind of wanna go over some of the images you sent here, if that's okay.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, they're kind of fun to look at. You can see it's a variety of different shapes and structures. And well, that's a table right there. You're standing on the platform I mentioned. The chain link fence that keeps people from falling down there is just out of sight. It's just in front of, down below the camera there. That table there is bell shaped. It came from about 40 feet away. We identified its quarry site. You actually can see the stone is actually shaped like that table, kind of a bell shape. And it was removed. It weighs about 9,000 pounds. It was moved into its present position and set up on 4 legs. The groove is trapezoid, as I mentioned. It's a deep, wide groove, unlike a lye stone, which is used for making soap, and the stone's usually 36 to 40 inches, but an inch to an inch and a half deep. You could pick one up yourself. This stone here is so different. The only similarity between this and making a soap making stone is it's a stone and it has a groove on it. Those grooves on soap making stones are tiny. They're very, very shallow, very small, and they're round. The stone itself may be rectangular, square. They're always round. They put a barrel, put ashes, and then they would leach water through it, and they would mix it with animal fats, and you have your soap. So that's one of the criticism. Oh, that's just the soap, or maybe a cider press. But you can't get a horse in there because of that big stone on the left there, the
Are
chamber, and you can't get in there. So the table, I think, is ceremonial. I think it's a
are
ceremonial table.
Are these stones all, are they limestone?
No, they're all granite, actually.
Granite, okay.
Granite, yeah. It's made out of mica. That gives a shininess. It's made out of feldspar and quartz. So it's a pretty hard stone. It does come up in layers. It is foliated. And if you look to the left and the right of the table, you can see all these little part of the wall there. Slabs stood on their end, stood up vertically. Those were part of the bedrock, of course, at one time. And then the monolith on the left side of the table, and just beyond that, it's that little animal pin. It's kind of hard to see. And you can't see the shape from here, but it's actually a trapezoid shape too. To the right of the table, you can see a standing stone. And if you went further to the right, you go into the oracle chamber that way. Behind the table, almost 30 feet across where all that grass is, that's the roof of the oracle chamber. And we did OSL dating with that, optically stimulated dating in 2020. And that result was that the dirt hasn't seen the light of day since 1550 AD. And that's important because people that are skeptical say, oh, the Paddies built it in the late 1700s or 1800s. That dirt hasn't seen a light of day, and that chamber was there before the dirt came. So Dr. Feathers of the University of Washington was conducting the OSL study, actually at our site, all the way down to Virginia at other sites, and they're all coming back pre-colonial or pre-Columbus, So,
That's interesting.
the V hut. And that V hut is the only structure that doesn't face true north, south, east, and west. It actually orientated southwest. And when my dad and I went to Ireland back in 1984, 83, I think it was actually, we saw some of the wedge tombs over there, and they look just like that, except some have a little flat back wall, but the size and the shape is just like that, but they're all orientated to the southwest, and that chamber is orientated in the same direction. These shapes also exist in Spain, and I had photographs on my phone and some of my 20,000 pictures if I can ever find them. But the ones in Spain, I don't know the orientation to them, but they look just like that. Out of the frame to the right, there are a bunch of stones you can't see. We think they were used to block up the chamber. And the ones in Ireland we saw, the stones were there too on the side, like they would put body in there, and then they would block it up, and then they'd wait a period till the flesh came off the bodies. That's the thought. We don't really know what the ancients did. They removed the bones and they put another body in there. So in Europe, they were used as tombs, actually, that style of structure.
That's interesting.
And that one's right next to it. It's just to the right of what you were just looking at. And that one runs true east and west. You can see the walls are made out of vertical slabs of stone, and there's roof slabs on top. And that structure runs around 25 feet. And just to the right, you can see all that small stonework in there. In the 1930s, when Mr. Goodwin photographed, and actually 1920, we have a photograph of that too, that center is missing. Unfortunately, in the 1800s, there were quarrymen up there removing the site. The Paddy family that was there selling it off. Yeah, and there's about 13, I think there's a dozen drill marks. That's all we have for modern tool markings is when the quarrymen were splitting some of the big stones. You don't see any of the drill marks in this particular picture. I think they stripped out the middle of that chamber because if you look to the far right, you can see another stone stood up, another vertical slab. We call those orthostats. Those stones, they do support roofs generally. I think the quarrymen, they work from behind where I'm standing to take this photograph. They worked for 3 years, we think seasonally, taking cartload after cartload of rock away from the site, destroying it.
Yeah.
And that helped us at so many of these ancient sites.
That happened in Tennessee as well with during the Civil War. Whenever they were building their forts and things, the stones were disappearing from Native American sites and things.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. You're just repurposing the stone but destroying the original site, which is really sad. I was in Ireland and I saw Nowth and Douth and Newgrange. They have like 2,000 megalithic sites. Newgrange has been completely restored on the front, which some people saying maybe they shouldn't have quite done it that way. It's an amazing structure nevertheless. It has an illumination in it. But I think it was Nowth or Douth. They look like gigantic UFOs, 3 of them close together in the Boyne Valley north of Dublin. And one of them had a crater. So when you read about it, like, why does that have a crater in the middle of it? 300 feet across, and it looks like it's been kind of devastated. When you read it, during the potato famine, some of the workers were put there to strip out the stone from there to build some of the road beds, to put them to work, to make money because people were starving and they needed. So it was for a good cause, but unfortunately, it was kind of a bad thing that happened to the structure,
Yeah.
Basically, that's looking back at the east-west chamber, and again on the very right, you can see one of the big slabs. So I think that was a complete. In Europe, they call them galley or gallery graves. They're in northwestern Ireland. They always use tombs. They're in Holland. They call them the giant's bed or the Hoedenbidden, the giant's bed. And they're also in France. And when I visited France, I saw them near Karnak, where you see those 3,500 rows of stone. They have one of these structures right near it, and they have what looks like our chamber in ruins, which I've never been able to find again. I didn't have my camera. I didn't take a picture of it. This is an 84. I didn't have a cell phone back then. My wife had left me on the bike by mistake, and I didn't see her for 3 or 4 hours later because I took a quick turn and said, hey, come over here. We got to see this thing, you know. And I saw her back at the hotel, and she wasn't too happy with me, and she had the Nikon camera. So, but anyway, it's so similar to what we have at our site. This structure is called the south-facing chamber, and unfortunately, part of it's missing on the left side. I think it's about where your head and my head are on the screen here. But this chamber faces south. People in the last couple of years say, you know, that looks like a turtle. And I'm like, what do they mean by that? I've been coming here since, 1955. I finally got back one day and I took the picture, and what you can't see on the left, it looks like a head. And then you have the hump, which is the hump on the top there is the turtle shell, if you will. The chamber, the lintel stone would be like the belly, and then each of the legs. And if you go to the far right side, there's like a little tail there. And again, without that head showing, you don't quite grasp or appreciate. We don't know for sure, but we know turtles were big to ancient people, along with serpents. Maybe they designed that as a turtle. It'd be a profile from the side looking at a turtle. And when you see it today, you look back like, how did we not see that 60 or 70 years ago, It's easy to miss,
It's easy to miss, yeah.
But our visitors told us, look at that. I'm like, oh, okay, I will.
I'll have to look into that more about what the turtle even means.
Some traditions think we're on the back of a turtle. The earth is a turtle shell, but it can vary, But the serpent is also Draco, the constellation, which some people say is a dragon. It's in the northern hemisphere. So if you're in the southern hemisphere, you have to look at something else, I guess. But maybe that's what inspired the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. If you visit that, you were there last year, they talk about that being a part of the inspiration. I think the serpent walls may have been inspired possibly by that, as above, so below, maybe. Mm-hmm. But we have snakes too. We do have snakes, that's for sure. That's just one of the chambers. It's so typical of the chambers, but the inside of that chamber is one that the LiDAR showed to be trapezoidal. We always thought it was a rectangular, chamber, It actually has a little window too on the left side down there where what you're looking at is the top of another roof slab to a chamber, at the bottom. Just above that roof slab, you see a little dark spot. That's one of the windows. And that's what they look like in the stone walls too, kind of like that, So we have them in the structures and in the stone walls over the 110 acres.
That's so interesting.
That's kind of close to the table. The rock on the right standing is that stone we were looking at from the other side. And that's a 2-story building. If you look closely at the top of that, you can see the orthostat, a big slab, and then it has a little roof slab on it. So that's a 2-story building in our complex. It's the only one remaining. We don't know if the quarryman destroyed another one, and wiped it out, but that's actually a 2-story structure. It faces true east, by the way, the sunrise towards the equinox. And it actually has an alignment there. It has actually winter solstice, equinox, and summer solstice too. That was discovered about 7 years ago. So I will say we have 57 alignments for the site today, 57, and that work began in 1965. So that's inside the Oracle Chamber looking north. It's a little cropped, a little bit hard to see. You're kind of looking in the chamber that's almost 30 feet long. I think it's 27 feet and a half or something like that. The speaking tube would be to the left. On the upper left, you can't see it, it'll be to the upper left. And below that is an 8-foot, what we call a bed. It's a great big hole built into with 2 walls with capstones, and actually an 8-foot person could actually climb into that thing, actually, and anybody smaller, of course. That's a speaking tube again. And again, we'll try to get a better shot of it, but I think it's cropped at the bottom. You can see where it's cropped. Part of the pitch is missing there. But it's a rectangular tube that goes 6 feet through the wall.
I'm really interested in that speaking tube. I find that really interesting. If you send me a better photo of this, I'm going to post it online.
Yeah, I will. I'll get the inside and outside. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, Somebody speaking, don't pay attention to them. That there is the summer solstice sunrise, and most of the alignment stones, for the most part, are shaped like an arrowhead with a point in the middle. You can see where the point is on the left side of that. It's asymmetrically shaped. And what we found out when we opened that clearing up around 1973 was the horizon, 4 or 5 miles distance, is a horizon of 2 hills coming together. and it's shaped like the top of that stone. So we think you actually shaped that stone to fit that notch 5 miles distance. Behind you is a stone circle. It's actually an ellipse with a stone in the middle. And if you stand there, the top of that rock and the horizon fit together, and you have a perfect alignment with the summer solstice sunrise on that. That stone made it onto America on Earth. Scott Walter showed again because my son back in 2012 during a break from college found out that he took Google Earth and he went across the Earth that goes right through the center of Stonehenge, right through one of the trilithons. They call it a ley line.
Mm-hmm.
That there's just one of the many upright monoliths at the site. Some of those are stellar alignments too. I think that might be on one of the star alignments with Arcturus or one of the, I'm not sure Arcturus, but it was one of the guy from Pennsylvania, Dr. Louis Winkler. He was the archaeoastronomer professor there from 64 up to 90, I think 97 or 98 he retired. He joined us in 97. And his work was to look at the 24 star alignments that were found by the Harvard-Smithsonian report in 1978 when they looked at our data that we collected from 73 to 77 by a professional survey team. So we took 5 years because we only had so much money. So each year we'd set aside so much money to come up and they'd survey some of the alignments on about the 16-acre area. By 77, we had enough collected to send it to the Harvard-Smithsonian Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And it was analyzed. We had the name of the person that did it. And they said, well, if these alignments were used for astronomical purposes, they won't work today, but they would work about 1800 BC, which kind of dated the same as that charcoal dating from 1971, 1800 BC, almost 4,000 years ago. And they said it's plus or minus 200 years. So he worked on those alignments, but unfortunately, Dr. Winkler, he did put out a 30-page report starting in 97, 98. He updated it each year, and then he suddenly dropped dead in 2001 from a heart attack. So he never quite completed that. We need another archaeoastronomer, if you will, to continue the work, you know. He was great, but unfortunately, he passed away.
Well, Dennis, from your time being there and everything that you've seen and studied with this place, we're just about out of time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I told you it would go so fast.
It did, yeah.
We didn't even cover a fraction of everything I wanted to cover in the show tonight. So I'm going to have you back on.
We'll have Part B. We can do. I love doing these shows. So send me and I'd be more than happy to be on a show. We get a lot more, and I'll try to get some of I'll bring that book, Holtz's book, next time. You know, I can show it on the camera and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I want to know real quick though is there any indication or anything that people found out who these people were?
Well, I think if you're talking about the psychics, their readings were very interesting about who they kind of gave a description of the people, the complexion, I think their height, where they may have been from between the three psychics that year in 1974. And those are the ones that are in his book long before Columbus. So they give some description of these people, and some of it was similar and some of it was a little bit different, you know, but you'd have to get the book and read. Actually, if I come on again, I'll bring the book and we can actually look at some of those pages. I can read it briefly, you know, some of the descriptions that the three different psychics left that year, you know.
Yeah, well, let's do that in November. I'll have you back on and we can discuss all of that.
We have the solstice coming up. We could talk about that too, you know, on the 20th to 21st this year. And on our webpage, we have quite a bit of information. And your audience, actually, if they go to our website, StonehengeUSA.com, there's a 12-minute theater video we show in our theater, but it's on there. And we also have a free mobile app download. And if you put it on your phone from your couch, it has it does what our tour guide map does, but everything's numbered. It has a picture of the structure. It has a textual description of it, and it actually talks to you about the structure. And if you're up there using it on your phone, you can walk along, and it does what the paper guide does, but it has more in-depth information, and people really like it. The lady in Stonehenge said, we just started doing it. We've been doing it for about 5 years, and she started doing it just recently. Last time we were there, we had little headsets back in the 90s, and the wind was blowing. It was kind of hard to hear. But now you can use your cell phone at Stonehenge, too. The same thing we've been doing at our place since 2019, I think. It has a lot of information on the website. It has all the activities coming up, drumming circles. We got another one. We have some paranormal stuff still coming up. And people really enjoy that because at this time of year, the paranormal in Salem, Massachusetts is only down the road 30 miles from here. And right now, they are bombed with people. I had people yesterday, you won't believe the crowds down there. And then after that, it's Thanksgiving down at Plymouth, and that's the two big seasons in Massachusetts, and it's so close to us. We get a lot of in fact, with the Laurie Cabot, the Witch of the United States, is
Yes.
living. She's been to our place. She had our brochures in her shop, and I think her daughters kind of carry on her work because I think she's in her 90s now.
Yeah,
So,
I've met her
oh,
about
really?
15 years ago, and she was just the
Oh,
sweetest person.
she is,
Yeah.
and yeah, that's when I met my wife, and I probably was flying,
Mhm.
when she was up, but last time I heard, she's still doing okay, I think, and their daughter's doing a lot down there, I think now. So yeah, we're
Well,
really close to Salem, Mass, right there.
well, Dennis, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing. And I'm sorry we were going a little bit fast. It's just for time's sake. We only
I
have
can talk.
60
I
minutes.
can talk back. But I thank you so much and your audience. I hope they enjoyed the show. And next time I'll try to bring I have a new book out. It took 5 years to put the book together. It replaces a 2003 book, which replaced a 1977 book, which replaced a 1946 book. So we have all the latest stuff in our book. And our manager and my daughter-in-law helped me put the book together over 5 years. And it came out for the equinox, the spring equinox. And then Scott Walters had a big thing, so it was just in time for him to come up and do a kind of a conference. And he was actually selling some of my books while I was talking, so it's kind of cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again. Yeah, I hope we'll see you soon then. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Gateway broadcast live from Public United Radio 107 FM New Orleans. Erie Expeditions magazine is a new magazine that I just put out. It's dedicated to exploring the intriguing and often spine-chilling world of the paranormal. Whether you're a seasonal paranormal investigator or a curious traveler with a penchant for the supernatural, we have something to spark your curiosity and ignite your adventurous spirit. Check out this beautiful magazine. It's at erieexpeditions.com. I'm going to put the thing up here real quick. There it is. You can buy it. It's available digital and in print. It's only in print in America right now, but in the future, we are going to offer it overseas as well. I think the digital version is $6 or something like that. It's a great magazine. Download it, erieexpeditionsmagazine.com. Until next time, thank you for your support.